Hey, welcome into Dawg Walk Talk. I am Wes Blankenship, joined by Palmer Toms, and we're going to recap a couple things that have happened since we last spoke, since you last heard our voices. Palmer, Mike Bobo is back. Brian McClendon is back. They are reuniting with the Dogs and Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp on the staff as well. Really makes me wonder who else Georgia should hire to bring back. And I wrote about that over at DawgsHQ, but a little tongue in cheek with some of the names I mentioned. But Palmer, who do you think should come back to join the Dogs? And more importantly, what do you think Bobo and BMAC bring to the staff?
Yeah, the combination of Kirby, Bobo, and Muschamp makes me feel like we're back in the 90s before I was even born. They were playing in Georgia, taking the field between the hedges. No, but I really liked your piece there with a couple of fun additions to the staff. Eric Taylor would be my choice there. Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose.
Coach Taylor. Yeah.
Coach Taylor. No, but in all seriousness, I do think that these are big additions to the staff. Anytime you can bring in somebody that is honestly overqualified to be an offensive analyst like Mike Bobo, somebody that's got, not only experience as a quarterback's coach, position coach there, but also as an offensive coordinator in the SEC at two different stops and a head coach out at Colorado State, three different stops actually as OC between Georgia, South Carolina, and Auburn this past season. And like I said, head coaching stop at Colorado State that didn't go all too well, but we won't hold that against him. I do think it's a big addition there. You can see the masterminds on the offensive side of the ball are just, continuing to build. You've got Todd Monken, who's bringing in a lot of new ideas from the pro level. Now you're adding to him, you've already got Buster Faulkner, somebody who's been an offensive coordinator that's working hand in hand with Monken there. You've got Matt Luke, who's been an offensive coordinator and a head coach before. You've got Del McGee, who was an interim head coach at one point, and head coach at the high school level too. So a lot of people that have a lot of experience in leadership. And I think it only helps to add Bobo as well as McClendon, another guy who's been an offensive coordinator. I think looking at McClendon specifically, we covered that one really well. Talking to former players, Keith Marshall had very high praise.
We broke that story, by the way. We should have led the episode with that, with the pat on the back. Good job on that, man. That was a real hustle over the weekend, but yeah, a lot of excitement surrounding that news.
Yeah. And I think in speaking with Keith Marshall, that kind of encompassed it all. I opened it up thanking him, for joining us. And he was like, "Hey man, my boys are back in Athens." Mm-hmm. Speaking about Bobo and McClendon there, his former running backs coach and his former offensive coordinator. But we spoke really focused in our conversation on McClendon, since that's the guy that he spent the most time with as a running back, the guy who recruited him to Athens, the guy that coached him for the majority of his time in Athens. McClendon was on staff, Marshall's the entire time, but his last season, he made the move over to wide receiver, where he has been for the rest of his career to this point. I think that's a big move for, not only on-field production. You look at how the receivers that he coached at South Carolina, Deebo Samuel, who we've seen have an incredible season in the NFL with the 49ers, was an all SEC player in 2018. You add on top of that, Brian Edwards and Shi Smith, both going for more yards and catches than any Georgia receiver had this year. I know we've talked about the Georgia receiver room, going back to our last conversation, talking about Burton and his decision to transfer out. I do think that Georgia will continue to spread around the wide receiver, production, the touches there. But I think that you are going to see, you're seeing a guy come in with a lot of experience under his belt, both as a wide receivers coach and as an offensive coordinator. Passing game coordinator was set to take on that role at Miami on Mario Cristobal's first staff down there at the U. but he's now coming in, and is going to be working, each and every day with these Georgia wide receivers. I think that, to me, when I think about the best example of a impact that a great wide receivers coach can have, it's Joe Brady at LSU. And obviously those were some freak wide receivers that he was working with in that 2019 season. But, if you listened to those guys, whether it was Joe Burrow talking about the, wide receivers, or Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson talking about their coach, the work that they put in, I think that you can really see the impact that a position coach and a wide receivers coach can have, some fresh ideas there. So, I'm not going on the record predicting that kind of production out of these Georgia wide receivers for next year. If it happens, then Georgia's going to be in a great position to repeat as a national champion. But I do think that McClendon coming in helps on that front as well as on the recruiting trail.
Yeah. And look, Chad Simmons and Jake Roos are going to speak more about recruiting coming up in this episode, but I think it is a huge win on both fronts. Obviously with Bobo, the fact that he is from Thomasville, South Georgia, you can't ever have enough representation down there if you're the Dogs. And I think that is really the thing that a lot of people are maybe overlooking in this, wondering what's it going to mean for him to be an analyst versus an on-the-field coach or coordinator or whatever. The leadership that you mentioned is obviously a big part of that. He'll be coaching up coaches essentially, but having a presence down there in South Georgia is huge. Even though Georgia has a national approach to the guys they get, they're going to get the best players they can, regardless of where they're from. They have a punter from Australia. Finally, we got a punter from down under. But Bobo's presence there will be felt. And then with BMAC, there's a tweet today as we record now on Wednesday, February 3rd, from a 2023 commit that is referencing Brian McClendon. I don't think BMAC can retweet this. I don't know what all the NCAA rules are on all that, but Raymond Cottrell saying, I know y'all see who our wide receiver coach is. Finna have a freaking blast. What's not to like about us, man? I feel like I'm one of those automated voices reading text.
One of the TikTok voices.
Yeah, those TikTok voices, that girl really gets on my nerves. I'll just go ahead and say, if I hear a viral video with the TikTok girl, I have to mute it. But anyways, Raymond Cottrell, you can look up his tweet. Raymond, Cottre 14, Georgia commit for 2023. He says, we love success over here, and he's talking about BMAC. So huge win on both fronts. From a coaching standpoint, I loved your point about the comparison to Joe Brady. What is a difference or a few differences that you're expecting to see from a BMAC coached wide receiver room and a Cortez Hankton receiver group?
It's an interesting question, and it's one that I'm really looking forward to diving into over the course of February as we approach spring practice. Like you said, broke the news over the weekend, and it's just been a whirlwind of news coming on between injuries and signing day yesterday. I do think it's going to be interesting. I'll say that I think that anytime you get fresh set of ideas, anytime you've had a coach that's there for a while, Cortez being at UGA for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm not saying that this isn't a knock against Cortez Hankton. I think that when you've got somebody that's been there that long, some of the things that they say probably fall upon deaf ears, and again, not a knock against Cortez Hankton. I think that's part of the obviously you want continuity in your staff, but bringing on new ideas is never a bad thing. It's typically pretty good to bring on some fresh opinions and fresh voices. And I think that that's going to be welcomed in the, not only just in that wide receiver room with the guys that are returning, Ladd McConkey, AD Mitchell, Kyrus Jackson. Those are the big 3, but you've obviously also got Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, Dom Blaylock, guys like that are going to be trying to, come back and make bigger impacts in 2022 than they did in 2021. I think that, not only in that room, but I think that in the offensive room as a whole, some of the ideas that BMAC can bring in, from the time that he's spent elsewhere, learning from coaches like Mario Cristobal, learning from the coaches that he worked with at Oregon and worked with at South Carolina, and even the guys that he worked with previously at Georgia. I think that he's going to be able to, take the things that he's learned from them and implement them here at Georgia. What that is exactly, I'm not quite sure. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to see. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to, finding out this spring as we, get our first taste of BMAC as a, new Georgia assistant.
Yeah. One thing that, I think I've been speaking to a few people with about since the last episode was Jermaine Burton's departure. Obviously, something about the way receivers perform at Georgia factored into his decision. The lazy social media narrative is that he didn't want to play for Stetson Bennett. Couldn't be further from the truth. I think if you just look at the production of Georgia's offense, you don't have a guy at Bama. You don't have a king out there catching every pass, catching 60 balls at Georgia. It's just not what they do. Can they do that? Are they interested in trying to do that? Maybe, maybe that's a wrinkle in the offense for next season, but not doing that was good enough to win a national championship this year. So that's something that I'm interested to see as well. And
not to mention the fact that you saw somebody that was probably considered more of a rotational guy than the star of the room making the biggest catch of the season.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, that being A.D. Mitchell.
Dude, when you have underclassmen, freshmen, Bowers and Mitchell out there making all the grabs, that tells you about your role at that position. It doesn't matter what your seniority is. They're going to get the ball to who's open. And that's something that Burton had to think about. And maybe he's more interested in being that 60 catch guy. And honestly, he's probably more likely to be that guy at Alabama. But don't sleep on the talent that Georgia has at wide receiver and at tight end. And they're going to distribute. That's what the mailman does, man. He just distributes to anyone that's open, and that's how it's going to go.
Yeah, no. And I think as we kind of shift our focus, kind of wrap up our conversation and turn things over to Jake and Chad Simmons, it's going to be interesting to see how these, guys that signed in this 2022 class, some of these wide receivers, Dylan Bell, who signed yesterday, on top of Denylon Morissette, Chandler, CJ Smith, and Cole Spear, how those guys can fit in. Couple of them on campus early in Morissette and Smith. Spear and Bell will be coming in the summer. But I think that there are some, I don't know what to expect out of any of those guys. I don't think that any of them are, none of them are probably your top choice at wide receiver in this class. But I do think that there's some dynamic playmakers. I mean, just Bell specifically, he's a guy that played running back in high school, very comfortable with the ball in his hands. And I think that he's capable of doing some special things, very capable of that. I think that that's, I saw this comparison yesterday on some of our boards, and I'm not going to go as far as making that comparison, but I will point it out because of the connections that you've got. Deebo Samuel again. I brought him up when talking about Brian McClendon. You're now going to have the coach that was the offensive coordinator for Brian McClendon. The Brian McClendon, the coach that was the offensive coordinator for Deebo Samuel, being the position coach for a guy that has a lot of that same skill set, that capability to do a lot of things in open space with the ball in his hands. So getting the ball in the hands of Dylan Bell, whether that be, on a sweep out of the backfield, on a reverse or something like that, or obviously passing it to him as a wide receiver. We've seen how Deebo has had that kind of impact with the 49ers this year. And I think that if there's somebody capable of that in this 2022 signing class, it's probably Dylan Bell, who I'm sure that Jake and Chad will get into here before.
Yeah, I know Jake likes Dylan a lot, and I want to ask Lad McConkey for forgiveness for not mentioning his name in the list of freshman pass catchers at Georgia. But great point about the impact that a freshman could have. A.D. Mitchell went viral in the offseason after G-Day last year because he caught that touchdown pass from J.T. Daniels. Who would have thought back then that kid was going to catch what proved to be the game winner in the national championship? I mean,
and from that quarterback.
Yeah, that's a great point too. All right. After this break, Jake Roos, Chad Simmons talking 2022 Dogs, maybe a little bit of 2023 as well. Another exciting class for Georgia, and we'll leave it to the experts to break it all down.
All right, folks, welcome back to Dawg Walk Talk. I'm Jake Roos, and with me, the director of scouting over at on3.com, the man himself, Chad Simmons. Chad, thank you so much for joining us always on Dawg Walk Talk, buddy.
Yeah, man, let me say director of recruiting, so I don't try to act like I'm Charles Powell. I'm not Charles. He's the scouting director who runs that. So, yeah, I'm just the recruiting guy, just the little guy on the totem pole, and Charles takes care of all the scouting and the eval. So, Georgia fans, if you're mad about somebody's ranking, go talk to Charles.
I see. All right. So Chad's taking a page out of my book. I always tell people I'm not the star guy. I'm not the guy who gives out the stars. So
I'll say this about Charles, man. Nobody works harder. I mean, that guy, as far as doing his homework, I mean, it's unreal. He's like a human encyclopedia. I mean, he's awesome. I'm happy to be working with him for sure.
No question. Well, Chad, know you're busy, man. Signing day has come and gone, but I know that just means the page is turned to 2023 for you. But I did want to go in depth with you a little bit on Georgia's 2022 class. The Dogs look like they sutured everything up on Wednesday. 3 additions to the class and signed a couple guys that they expected to sign. First off, I guess let's talk about these new additions to the class. I think that makes sense to start it there. When we're talking about those guys, first off, Andrew Paul is where I'd like to start, because that's just not a guy I feel like a lot of people know a lot about, primarily because his whole recruitment kind of took place over the course of about a month and a half. So everything kind of really exploded. DawgsHQ was out there on the scene, and we encourage you to go check out that exclusive that we had with Andrew Paul over there. But just kind of your thoughts on Andrew Paul, this pickup for Georgia. I mean, it's always interesting with these late guys who surge.
Yeah, I mean, I watched some of the interview. I mean, obviously a well-spoken kid, man, definitely confident, and I love the attitude about work. He made it clear he's not going to shy away from competition, which I know for a fact. A few guys told me they were going to a school because the opportunity to play right away. The less bodies at their position, and that was not even in the cards for Paul as far as part of his, the equation to get to Georgia. But so I got a lot of respect. I didn't get a chance to really cover him one-on-one, but he's a guy that I got a lot of respect for, what kind of his approach and his mentality. I think Kirby's talked about that for this class, just their mentality, guys that want to work, guys that want to buy in, guys that want to be team players. And, Paul obviously exploded. There was obviously a late battle between Clemson and Georgia, depending on who you talk to, what your sources were. Some were on the Clemson side, some with Georgia. And I know it was close, man. I can definitely, me working different channels and doing what I do, it was pretty equal. And the way Paul did it, didn't tell anybody. So kept everybody pretty much guessing until he made that announcement. But I kind of stuck with my guns and went with Georgia, and Georgia won out in the end. But a kid that, 2,600 plus yards as a senior rushing, state champion. I think 44, total touchdowns as a senior. I think when you look at him and just glancing at his film, he's built like you would think a Georgia running back, 5'11", 200, pretty chiseled, runs away from people, pretty powerful. But, I think it was made pretty obvious that Georgia was looking for the best option for that second running back in this class, with Branson Robinson signing early. They had Jordan James committed, but Jordan was looking around. So when he did, Georgia did the same. And they found Paul, and I think Paul's a great fit for Georgia. So I think they need bodies at running back, and especially in the 2023 class, the guys moving on from this year and next year. I think he's a great kid and somewhat of a late find. He did a great job staying patient. Michigan was involved as well. And I think just the way to be, I think he did it right. He didn't have the offers he thought he deserved in December. He took his time, waited for February, exploded, got the offers that he wanted, and found his home, and it's Georgia.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that it's great fit. To me, I see a lot of similarities between he and Branson. I think that, kind of similarly built guys. Obviously, nobody's built quite like Branson Robinson, but
incredible Hulk, maybe.
That's right. Now, but bringing it a little bit closer to home, you're an Atlanta-based guy, and Georgia has done well, obviously, in the state of Georgia. Keeping guys home, pick up two big guys yesterday in Kristen Miller and EJ Lightsey. Let's start with Lightsey first, a 3-star for us over on 3.com, but a guy that a lot of teams really coveted. There were a lot of teams that were heavily involved. Top programs really like this guy. EJ's a kid I know that you've gotten to know a little bit as well over the course of this whole thing. Just kind of your impressions of him as a player and as a fit with Georgia.
Yeah, for me, he's just a typical, what I think of a South Georgia player, man, just tough. The guy works, plays hard, all about the team. There's no me. He's not looking for all the accolades and the personal, recognition. He's a guy who wants to play football. From South Georgia, state champion now, first time in something like 1950 something for Fitzgerald. So been a long time coming for those guys. And, he's a guy that started off as a defensive end, edge rush guy. So they're playing obviously lower class football at Fitzgerald. So they don't have the numbers and size as far as those Metro Atlanta, Northern Georgia schools and Gwinnett County and Fulton County and all that. So he's playing running back and defensive end. And that's where he first started getting this ability to rush the passer. The guy, but he's then kind of undersized. When guys put their eyes on him, he's like 6'1", 6'2", 200 pounds. He's not a defensive end in college. And then his coach moved him back to playing linebacker his junior year. Obviously, it's the COVID year. Not people can put. He's been through a lot, as all these guys have in 2023 or 2022. And he's a guy, just to me, just a true football player. Toughness. I think he's athletic. Him being a running back shows how athletic he is. He's physical. And I think, again, he can play a lot of different roles for Georgia. They want to blitz him off the edge, play him in the middle. I think he's obviously an inside linebacker most of the time at Georgia, and they want to really just isolate him. That was a big thing he told me that about Georgia. His decision was Georgia, their plan is to they don't want to move guys around. He said they want to put him at a position, lock him in, and prepare him to hopefully get drafted when they're inside linebacker. They did with Roquan Smith or Nakobe Dean, Quay Walker, guys like that. And, I think just what he'll bring is that toughness, that edge, and really the hard work mentality to go with his athleticism. So, I like him as a physical linebacker and a guy that can run.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really interesting addition. For this class, to me, I made this comparison. I'd be interested to just hear your thoughts on it. When I'm kind of laying these three guys that Georgia recruited for inside linebacker this year, Jalen Walker, CJ Washington, and EJ Lightsey, to me, Jalen Walker is the Nakobe Dean. I think he's the guy who has the most upside. I think he's kind of the maybe most college ready. I think CJ Washington, very much a Channing Tindall type with a lot of athletic upside, a guy who can really explode. And then to me, EJ Lightsey, like Quay Walker, not as big, not as tall, not as long necessarily, but a guy who does everything pretty well overall.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say Lightsey is quite as athletic as Quay. Quay is such a freak athlete. Can just at his size, 6'3", 6'4", to be able to run 30 yards down the field and cover, and the way he blitz off the edge. And I've always been super high, on Quay. But again, another South Georgia kid that from like Lightsey, that worked. He really stayed the course, and guys like Quay could have gotten frustrated early, but he stayed and ended up winning a championship at Georgia. But no, I like it. I think with Jalen, the biggest thing maybe with him and Nakobe difference is the size. Jalen's taller, longer, thicker, and Nakobe was just so instinctive and so smart. And he was on, and Jalen's very smart, so off the field, very smart kids carry that to the football field too. I like the comparison for the 3 and the 3 for sure. And CJ just jacked up, athlete, kind of in that similar size mold for sure as Channing Tindall, as far as a guy that just take off like a missile and go get the quarterback. And obviously he'll hit you coming from that Cedar Town and another physical guy. But yeah, I like the comparison.
Now we're going to touch on a guy that I think everybody, a guy that's hard not to love, I think, and that's Kristen Miller. A great defensive lineman out of Cedar Grove. Cedar Grove been great to Georgia. A lot of good players have come through there. Kristen, such a personality, a guy that just naturally people gravitate toward, but one heck of a football player too. Chad, I know you've been covering Kristen for years at this point, been well tuned into that recruitment. Just give us the insight here, man. I mean, what kind of guy are they getting both on and off the field? Because like I said, to me, it's as much about off the field with Kristen as it is on the field. And that's a big statement.
There's no doubt that Kristen will make that locker room better, that practice field better, the classroom he's in better, whoever rooms with him, that dorm's going to be better, more upbeat, more positive. He's definitely one. And I love most of the guys that I cover, get to know them and kind of tell their story. But he's different. He's just different. He has that infectious personality, man. That's always smiling, always upbeat. He brings positive energy whenever he's around. That's what he is and who he is. And I think, he has fun, sweating out there at Cedar Grove in 95 degrees in July. He makes that fun. He has fun. He'll keep it upbeat. If they're in a tough game, he'll keep guys loose, keep them focused in a fun way. I mean, he just loves life. That's what it comes across to me as, and which is great. This world's so negative today. The world needs more Kristen Millers, without doubt. So with him as a player, obviously big kid, 6'4", 6'5", around 290, another, I think, two-time state champion at Cedar Grove. And you love guys, if you're Kirby Smart, to get guys that want to win, that know how to win, that have that winning mentality. And he's a natural leader too. I mean, he's a guy that wants to work, and wants to have fun at the same time. But he when it comes down to business time, he's focused and ready to work. And as a D lineman, he's another guy that kind of fits in perfectly what Georgia loves to do defensively, playing a lot of odd man fronts and, moving guys around and, on third and passing situations, third downs, move them inside, play them outside. At defensive end, on first and second downs. I mean, he's a guy that's very versatile, very strong at the point of attack. He can turn and run. He's a good athlete. Not I wouldn't say Trayvon Walker-esque athletically, but he's a good athlete. And I think he'll come in, obviously, getting injured, which could have been worse. So I'm glad that happened on almost the next to last play, almost in the state championship game. But he'll be back in the summer. And I expect him to really battle, early if he's healthy enough to play early. I mean, he's a guy that will come in with the mentality and the confidence that he can compete and play for Georgia right away.
Yeah, a lot of swagger with Kristen Miller. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Georgia signs two other guys, long committed, Dylan Bell and Darius Smith. Darius, obviously, the in-state kid, and a guy I know that you've covered for a long time as well. These Texas guys, we're expanding the reach a little bit here when it comes to getting out there for sure. But, with Darius, to me, I think he may be the forgotten gem of Georgia's class when it comes to what people are thinking. I think that he's flown a little under the radar because of where he is. He's not very vocal. He doesn't do a lot of interviews or media. He didn't do a ton of camps, anything like that. But to me, looks like a pretty special player.
Yeah, I mean, all about the upside. When you're, 6'6", 225, I think we have him as like 35-inch arms. I mean, he's a guy that really, I think, can excel in what Georgia wants to do with bodies and athletes like that off the edge. I mean, he's a guy that will play that stand-up linebacker position out there, and he can run. He's a basketball player, runs track. So a lot of intangibles, he'll bring, with him to Athens. And I think it's all about, to me, if I was a coach like Kirby Smart, he's the guys that make me excited about my job because you have a lot to work. You have a raw talent. It's a good program at Appling for sure, but Appling County, weight program, nutritional program, that's not the University of Georgia. Them getting him to Athens, they can build onto that frame, maximize, his God-given, frame and talent. To me, that makes me excited if I'm a coach because he's a guy that has been dunking since middle school. He can run on track. He sacks the quarterback, super long, and versatile. So to me, I agree 100% as far as hidden gem. I know probably in Kirby's eyes, not a hidden gem, but I think in the fans, probably a forgotten guy, been committed for so long. He doesn't live in the metro. He's not always on social media. He didn't commit, take 5 visits. I mean, he's just been Georgia, off in the beginning. And I think Georgia has to be excited about what he brings, maybe not next year, but the years to come, about what he can do at the University of Georgia from a pass rush standpoint and just his versatility.
Yeah, had a chance to talk with his coach down there. It's interesting you mentioned the nutrition program. He said, look, we pump them full of chocolate milk and peanut butter sandwiches when we can, but this ain't Athens, Georgia, man. We don't have. He said, I think this kid can realistically add 20 to 30 pounds and still play with a lot of the speed and size that he's got. So, like I said, really, really excited about Darius Smith. Chad, I wrapping things up here. When you're talking about this 2022 class for Georgia, the Dogs finished 3rd in the nation. Obviously, Texas A&M, we won't get into that. I think Lane Kiffin and Jimbo are doing enough talking for everybody when it comes to where that all stands. But, this class overall, your thoughts on how Georgia finished, how they wrapped this thing up, where they stand in this cycle, and, I guess some areas for improvement and some areas where you feel like maybe they really succeeded in this class.
I mean, if you finish top 3, that's a great class. Now, I don't think this class measures to where Kirby's been before when he finished number 1 as far as the entire class. But I think it's a good group. I think the biggest area you have to improve on next cycle is offensive line, specifically offensive tackle. I saw a few of those guys play along the way, and I'm a big Ernest Green guy. I do think he's a versatile guy that could play, kind of like Jamari Sawyer a little bit. He could play tackle I think he's better inside long term. But again, he's so versatile and has the size and feet. But I think they have to in 2023 hit the offensive tackle position and do it well with top guys. I think this class, what stands out probably as a strength, I like the defensive back group. I think it's a good group. We're talking about Texas, Julian Humphrey. Going to Florida and getting Jaheim Singletary. Obviously, Malachi Starks right there in Athens probably will play early at safety for Georgia. I think that would, to me, on paper, looks like the strongest, in my eyes, strongest position group I liked in this class. I think, again, overall, I think it's a good group. You got a good mixture of what you needed. But I think looking ahead, I think you got to get some major elite playmakers at wide receiver. I think that's why you got Brian McClendon. He's got to go win some battles. And it doesn't look great in Georgia, the state of Georgia, next year for top flight receivers. So Brian will have to work some of that magic and go recruit guys in Florida or California or Texas or the Carolinas and pull 1 or 2 guys on the outside, and then offensive line again going back. That's a big need for next year. But again, this group, if you finish in the top 3, top 5, that's an elite class. And to go with what you already have, on campus coming back and to build on. And of course, the portal has changed everything from really the importance of recruiting, which I kind of hate a little bit. I mean, the classes they're still very important, but not as important, because if you miss or you want to save 3, 4, 5 spots, you go to the portal and get transfers. And, it takes a little bit away from these recruiting classes, but you still got to sign top class after top class if you want to compete and win championships.
Chad, looking at that list of Georgia commits, is there any names that jump off to you as maybe a guy who could surprise some people? Obviously everybody's going to talk about the 5 stars, the Malachi Starks, the Michael Williams, so on and so forth. I mean, those guys are top flight players. Is there any guy that you think maybe, has a chance to really come into Georgia and flourish?
I mean, it's hard to say maybe, under the radar type of kid when you sign with Georgia, because they're recruiting national names. I think a guy that doesn't get talked about a lot, just going back to receivers, Denylon Morissette. I mean, I think, him coming, started off in Marietta, went up north to play, came back, he was at Brookwood, North Cobb. So he's bounced around, obviously. But I mean, every time I've seen him, that kid's performed at an extremely high level. Now, I don't think anyone part of his game is elite, but I think he's quicker than people think. I think he has great ball skills. He runs very good routes. He'll be ready, I think, physically to compete early if he's healthy for playing time. I mean, he's a guy that I think if he stays healthy, I think he'd be a guy that people really don't talk a lot about, I don't think, in this class, that could make a splash.
All right, last question. You know I got to ask it because the 2022 class has been shaken up by the arrival of a new 5-star out of Milton, and that's the reclassification of LT Overton. I know you had some insight over at on3.com about this one. You know, a lot of people asking where Georgia stands in this. How does Georgia factor in? Obviously, look, what I've told people, Scott Cochran had to take a leave of absence. I think that impacted this relationship. Dan Lanning leaves for Oregon. That impacts this relationship. Kirby Smart looks like he's taking this one over. He's making it a personal project. How do the Dogs factor in now for LT Overton now that we know he's going to be a 2022 signee?
Well, I really think, I mean, what I always tell people asking you that is to go subscribe to DawgsHQ.com and get the intel. You know, that'd be my first answer to that. But to go a little bit farther and expand on that, and I really think right now it's a 2-team race. I think right now A&M's, if there is one, in the driver's seat, coming off his 3rd trip to College Station, you know, last weekend. Obviously, we've seen what they did this year already. And now he could be part of that 2022 class on the defensive line alone with the guys they just signed. Number one, I guess, historic class. They got number one class in the country. I think Georgia's made up some ground, but like you mentioned, Scott Cochran was his guy from the beginning. When he had to step away, that did hurt. But Georgia, I think over the last, I would say, from my sources, probably the last 3 months or so, has made up some significant ground. And I think it's A&M 1, Georgia 2. I do think he'll be on both campuses again, you know, in April, maybe a spring practice at Georgia in March, whenever they get on the field. But his plan is to visit all 5. You know, Oklahoma, he's an Oklahoma legacy, and he does, you know, I think he likes Oklahoma more now than what he did before because of the Clemson connections going there with Venables and Todd Bates and those guys. But I really think right now A&M and Georgia are at the top with a pretty significant gap between 3, 4, 5. And you mentioned Dan, you have to keep an eye on Oregon being sneaky here. I mean, he does like Lanning a lot, you know, and with him taking a trip to Eugene, you never know. I mean, you know, with what they have going on with Phil Knight out there with the whole Nike complex and just kind of what's around the NIL opportunity out there and stuff like that, with Nike tied to it. I think he's definitely one that has his eye on the NIL. And if you got to pick with the NIL, it's hard to go against Texas A&M. It's just that with what's going on right now, and just what they're doing too recruiting wise. So I like A&M with Georgia second right now.
Well, I don't feel like this will be the last time you and I have a chat about LT Overton. I think that one's going to make for quite a spring and probably quite a summer for all of us that cover recruiting. So looking forward to following it. Chad, thank you so much for your time, man. Like I said, I know you're a busy guy, but you're always so generous with your time, not only here on Dawg Walk Talk, but when I'm hitting you up too. So I appreciate you as always, brother.
Oh, my pleasure, Jake. Anytime. You're a good friend, buddy.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into this edition of Dawg Walk Talk, presented to you by DawgsHQ. We'll talk to you later.